The cold had a sound to it when it came from the heart of the north, a dry, clean hush that lay over Winterfell in the hour before dawn. The steam rising from the hot springs turned to a ghostly whiteness along the inner walls, and the statues of kings in the crypt, far below the earth, felt the settling of the season as if they had once drawn breath and now measured stillness by its edge. Eddard Stark moved between them with a lantern that threw the slow swing of light over gray stone and dust and the black iron of the old swords. He did not come down to speak with the dead. He came because the dead always made the living sit straighter. When he reached Lyanna, he set the lantern at his feet and knelt. The pale stone roses on her slab seemed to gather frost along their carved petals. "Winter is coming," he murmured, as though it were news to a sister that had never known anything else. "And my friend has come north at last." Bootfalls sounded up in the stair, fast but cautious, and Jory's face bent, solemn and genial both, into the lantern's reach. "My lord, the king is awake. He's asking for you." Ned brushed stone dust from his knees. "Asks? Does he?" There was affection in it that belonged to a boy by a forge and a taller boy swinging a wooden sword, long before crown and war and the slow stain of governance. "Very well." He took his lantern and climbed. The air grew warmer, and the old smell of iron and damp earth fell away for bread and wood smoke and the tang of boiled leather. Winterfell's courtyards were a gray-blue bowl beneath the paling sky. In the great yard, men were already at drill. The tramp of boots, the ring of blunted steel. Ned crossed the snows and steam with his cloak a dark, straight line behind him, and when he entered the great keep and its hall, servants sprang aside like reeds before a river. Robert Baratheon sat slouching at the high table with a ham hunked before him and a tankard big enough to drown a cat. He looked the way Robert always did in the morning, bleary and handsome and too much for the room, a man that had once been a storm given a body and expected to sit on a chair. He boomed when he saw Ned and held out an arm. Ned took it and they clapped shoulders. The motion put a groan in Robert's joints that he disguised with laughter. "Cold enough for you, Stark?" Robert said. "I'd forgotten the bite of it. Feels good. Tastes like steel." "It tastes like truth," Ned said. Robert tore a portion from the ham and chewed, unbothered by grease on his beard. He waved away a trembling cupbearer and gestured Ned into the seat beside him. "You came late from your tombs. You always do. Lyanna's down there." It wasn't a question. He lifted his tankard. "To her. To the woman who taught me what I could not keep." Ned did not lift a cup. He had none. He bowed his head. Robert drank. A squire, one of 100 faces in royal green and gold, hovered uncertain, then retreated as Robert wrinkled his nose. "Speak," Robert said. "I know that look. You've had it since the feast. It's the same damned look you get when a snowdrift sets at your door and you know you'll have to shovel it." Ned folded his hands. His knuckles looked older this morning. "You mean to make me your hand?" There was no point in fencing. Robert was a man that grew more stubborn with each polite step. Robert snorted. "I mean it as I mean my own name. Jon is gone. I need a man I can trust in a nest of vipers. I need you. Then listen to me once." He glanced past Robert to where Queen and cubs would sit when they came down. Empty chairs now, and servants smoothing the cloth as if that would keep temper from them later. "I won't take my children south while winter sets its foot on the north. And if I leave now, I leave my wife to face the season with a son half a boy and a boy half a man. Bran climbs as if the walls are ladders to some bright world. Robb thinks the word duty is a lamp that will always burn. Arya is wind. Sansa is summer. Rickon is a child. There's a letter I must heed." He let that pass like the breath it was, a bridge to truth. "If you would have me serve, let us hold a winter court here. For a month. For 2. Hold it where the king's justice can be a fire and not parchment. Let the north bring its disputes to you. Let the realm see you go where the cold is hardest instead of slouching back to your hot city to drown in wine. Delay our journey south until the first thaw." Across the hall, a group of northern men laughed deep and honest at something one of the Umbers had shouted. Robert's mouth quirked at the sound, half a fondness, half a challenge. He stroked at the beard that had too much gray in it for a man still in his prime. I'm not a bookish king, to sit and hear about pig fences and stolen sheep. The corner of his mouth went up again. But I'll do it. God's help me, Ned. I'd rather breathe this sharp air and drink your beer than choke on the stink of King's Landing and Varys' perfumes. Let them stew without me. I'll hold court here. We'll let the North come to us and see a king who will look them squarely in the eye. Summer court in Highgarden, winter court in Winterfell. Perhaps that's how it should have always been. Good. Ned's shoulders loosened in a way he had not noted until now. A cord had unknotted. There are roads to be closed. I'll send riders. They'll carry word to White Harbor, the Dreadfort, Carhold, Last Hearth. The Manderleys can bear tidings by sea further. Those who are close will come. Those who are far will send letters. You'll judge what we are, not what courtiers say we are. Robert squinted at him, as if measuring whether there was a blade in the favor. Very good, but... His eyes flicked to the door. It will be a hell to keep the Queen sweet. Have you managed it before? Ned asked, dry and unafraid. The rare spice of it made Robert bark a laugh that startled the torch smoke. Come. Robert slapped the table. We'll eat and then you see. And take me to your godswood and we'll talk like boys with sore arses after a whipping. I'll tell Cersei at dinner, when she can't shriek too loud.
Ned nodded.
He ate because he must, tasted little, and when he left the hall it was to find Robb and Jon in the yard with wooden blades and masks sitting askew. Red cheeks, their hair frosting at the edges where breath had dampened it. Arya skittered past like a lean cat, Nymeria at her heels, and Sansa walked with Septa Mordain, every step careful, lady a white shadow in the snow. Bran was at the stables, he learned, standing on a lintel too high for his age while Hodder stood below and said his own name like a prayer and a lament. Down, Ned told him when he found him, amused and not. Before you fall and your mother kills us both. Bran grinned and dropped and the wind ate his giggle. He was off at once, drawn by some high corner. Ned watched his small boots print the snow and had the sudden, unreasoning thought of a boy climbing a tower where he must not, and of a fall, and of a world that would tilt. He shook it off and told himself it was the cold that made omens. He did not tell Catelyn at once. She stood at an upper window with the winter light laying itself pale on her face and the fold of rained worry between her brows that had appeared the day Lisa's message had come. Catelyn had the letter hidden where she kept secrets. Too few places in a keep so old that even its stones had learned to listen. They spoke quietly of bread tallies and wool stocks, as stewards always had, and then her hands, which he had kissed and bruised and held and kept faith with for all the years since Riverrun, found his sleeve. What did he say? He'll stay. He felt the breath leave her. Good. It's good. Her mouth was within reach. He touched her and then let the press of it be that and no more because grief lay on them both like a thin veil. You must send to Luwin's crows at once. If he holds court, the North will come. We'll have to fill the stores twice if they do. What is it? He asked then because the fold remained. It's not the stores, she said. She never lied well to him, and when she did, it was conscious. A thing she set down like a heavy basket only because it must reach a place. It's the letter. You're thinking of going to Lisa. She accused the Queen's family. Her eyes were blue Tully eyes, made earnest and wide by that. If we do nothing and something happens to Bran or to the king while they are under our roof. We are not under a Tywin's roof, Ned said. I know what I know. Her voice thinned. I would go to the Eyrie and pull truth out of Lisa with my hands if I could. She might say more to me than she would to a raven. If she is wrong, then she is sick. If she is right, we are harboring a storm. You will not go alone, Ned said. Ser Roderick will sail with you from White Harbor to Gulltown. If you must go, go by ship to spare the mountain pass. If the sea still takes ships. I must go. She flinched and then laughed at herself. If the gods will it. I fear the sea. Then fear it and go anyway, he said softly. If fear were a noose and we lived by all it warned, we'd choke ourselves in our cradle blankets. She touched his cheek. You speak like a Northman. We are what we are, he said, and left her to speak with Luwin. The God's Wood did not change with news. The heart tree kept its bloody leaves, and the face carved long ago watched what men did without remark. Robert came with him, the crunch of snow under heavy boots. Behind them walked Ser Barristan Selmy, his white cloak dull with frost, and the hound with that dead laugh in his eyes that came when he had not yet found a thing to sneer at and was waiting. Jaime Lannister did not come. He had no use for groves that might remind him of men who had once prayed. Robert put his hand on the bark, as if making a pact with a god he had never honored. "It stares," he said. "I don't like it. It has seen worse than kings," Ned said. "Tell me now to my face. You'll not go south until we've held Winter Court here and the roads are safe." "It's done," Robert said. "I'll tell Cersei at dinner, and she'll turn that green look on me and I'll turn this fat look on her and we'll spit at each other, and then I'll go hunt a boar to sweeten my blood. A week, too. I'll sit the chair and hear Northmen's quarrels. Maybe I'll enjoy shouting at them." "And you'll name me Hand?" Ned asked. Robert's look slid aside. "Do I need to name you something for you to be what you've always been?" Then he shook his head. "Yes, blast you. I'll name you Hand." "Then I'll take it," Ned said, with a weight that felt like honor and iron both. They went back to the hall. The retainers had polished the table until even Robert's scars reflected in it. Cersei entered like a blade drawn. Her gown had a sheen like wet leaf in spring and looked wrong against the frost of the walls, as if it belonged in a garden wrapped in summer bees. Joffrey came at her shoulder, all brittle pride and the unsettled sneer of a boy learning to be cruel. Myrcella's little face held that careful brightness which says a child knows how not to wake sleeping monsters. Tommen's gaze was a puzzled blue. When Robert told her, she sat utterly still. The only sign was the whiteness around her knuckles where she gripped the chair. "The court is in King's Landing. The king is where he chooses to be," Robert said. He smiled for the hall, but his eyes were wary. "In winter, the court will come to Winterfell. Then you choose to defy the realm." Cersei's mouth had no softness in it. "You choose to leave the small council to govern alone. You choose to set a precedent that the king may vanish from his own city without warning." "I choose to breathe and hunt and shit where I please," Robert said. The hall held very still because men liked watching knives drawn even if they never meant to get cut. "It's decided. And we are all prisoners of the snow." "We are all prisoners of something," Robert said shortly and called for wine. Jaime sat a seat down, the light turned to brass on his hair. He watched the exchange with the mild contempt of a cat following a string it could break at any moment. Tyrion, lounging with his boots on a stool and his cup already half empty, grinned into the rim as if he'd had no hand in any world that had politics in it. Bran climbed that afternoon as he always did when his blood was full of wind and his mother's voice was a memory and not a presence at his elbow. He went up the old first keep, which smelled of bats and old rain. He balanced on a rampart where mortar had fallen out and the stones made a game of places for a boy's toes. He went higher. He was careful, always careful. He had a map of Winterfell in his hands and feet that was better than any maester's, a map made of the distances between his heartbeats. Voices pulled him toward the broken tower. He had never heard voices there that were not crow or wind. He found a window slit and drew himself up, small muscles burning, a grin on his face for the feat of it. He peered through. He saw hair like old gold in sun. He saw it twice. He saw hands and bodies where there should have been no bodies, and the voices were like the ones grown people used when they thought no one listened, hungry and low. He felt the world tilt, not because his foot slipped, but because the wrongness of it made his blood lurch. Someone turned, and eyes he would never forget found him. "The boy?" a woman said, now a queen, and then a calm man's voice said, "The things I do for love." And a hand reached and pushed and Bran fell, and his heart kept beat until it didn't. He would later remember none of this. For now he fell past the stone and the open air took him and kept him a while, as if to decide whether to be kind. Catelyn's scream carried through the yard, and all banners went still as if the poles had learned fear. After, Winterfell took on that strange quiet of places where someone dear has begun to lie between this world and the next. Men walked softer, Dogs did not bark without reason. Catelyn sat beside Bran and did not weep because the tears had frozen inside her and frayed her from 100 edges instead. The room was warm, hot, even heated by the springs, but grief made its own weather. Maester Luwin came and went with comfort that was facts and drafts in cups. Robb stood his watch outside with summer stretched across the threshold, a piece of shadow with eyes in it, and Jon came in the night to stand at the end of the bed and whisper to his brother about walls and crows and honor until Catelyn sent him away again with a word that bit. Ned had not meant for the king to see all this. He had meant for a court to ring with voices that had eaten their fill and warmed their hands by the king's word. Instead there was worry and the stale smell of fear in corners. Robert tried. He went to the yard and watched the men at the butts. He summoned northern lords with ravens. He laughed and drank and planned a hunt in the wolfswood to put color in his cheeks and blood back into a life that had gone gray long before it should have. Cersei stayed in her chambers save when she must come and sit beside him and watch the northern lords who arrived like pieces on a board set up wrong. The great Jon was first, because an umber always arrives when laughing makes a thing bearable or worse. He bellowed at the gate like a bear that had learned courtesy in its youth and forgotten it again. "Where's this king?" he demanded, slapping snow from his cloak with hands like spades. "I've not ridden over 3 rivers to bow to an empty chair." He bowed to Robert's full one. Behind him came Ser Helman Tallheart, and Lord Serwyn and Dustin's kin, and men from the rills with salt stiff in their beards. Manderly sent word that ships were icing up in White Harbor and that he'd come when wind and tide allowed. Bolton sent a raven that read like a frown. Ned sat with his hands chain heavy around his neck because Robert had fumbled it to him that night as if it were a joke and a wedding both. He heard disputes about timber and tithes and border cattle. He made the choices a Stark made, measured, firm, with fairness, a blade that had to cut both ways to stay true. Robert listened some days and grew red in the face and shouted and then laughed and made gifts as if he had mines under his seat. Other days he did not come, and Ned held court alone, and it was better for it. On the 3rd night after Bran's fall, the assassin came. Catelyn had not left the room for more than a washing and an hour of standing in the yard with her face to the snow as if it could teach her not to break if it blew hard enough. She had sent Sansa back to the Sept with Septa Mordane and a murmured prayer like a blade dulled by use. Arya had been found in the kitchens with a wooden spoon that had been meant for a cauldron and now served as a sword. She was corralled only because Nymeria permitted it, with a contemptuous yawning snap of teeth at the men who tried to take Arya by the arm instead of asking. The knife moved under the blanket as if the blanket itself had found malice. Catelyn saw the shadow and did not know what she saw until the hand and the gleam of the blade were above Bran's throat. She caught the blade. The pain was cleansing, sudden, clear, something she could grip because there was nothing else to grip. She did not think, she only held, and the man smelled like wet leather and old smoke, and he said something like a prayer to a god that liked coin, and then summer came up off the floor like a piece of the night that had learned to spring. There was a red splash and the sound of a throat trying to hold its air and failing. The man went down, and Catelyn went with him because the knife had gone through her fingers. They found the blade after, when there were hands ever. Beware and bandages and Luwin's voice a steady rope. It was a strange, lovely thing in a way that made her teeth hurt. The steel had a rippled darkness to it like watered silk, and the hilt was dragonbone shaped for a different hand than hers. She put her bandaged palms above it and could not help the tremor. "This is not a bandit's toy," Luwin said. "No," Ned agreed. He had the stillness to him of a man who had used all his movement up before he came into the room. "Where is it from?" "Valyria," Tyrion said from the doorway. He looked suddenly very sober without his smile, as if he had never had a need to grin in his life and felt strange bones in his face. "Or some lord with the money for it. Is not a thing that strays far from wealth. May I?" He raised his hand and did not move until Ned nodded and watched him as he would watch a fox near his hens. Tyrion touched the dragonbone and made a face that was half admiration and half calculation. Too fine for a Sel's word. Too fine for, well, anyone with sense on the King's Road. Then the sense was not theirs. Catelyn's voice was a raw whisper. She did not ask who had done it. She was a Tully. She knew a river's course when she saw where it came from and where it meant to go. She looked through the doorway and saw, perhaps, golden hair in her mind. She bit her lip and tasted the taste of old doubts and new hatred. When the hall learned of it, the tension that had been a weave of small irritations pulled tight enough to sing. Robert went to Catelyn's door and stood outside it for a long time without speaking. He did not ask permission to enter, because he had lost the habit of asking for permission from anyone. He sent a guard to fetch Ned. "You think it was mine?" Robert said when they stood in the corridor where no one could hear something breaking or hardening. "I think it was someone's who does not fear to be seen holding such a blade," Ned said. "Someone who could say the knife is his and not be questioned for it. I think it was sent to finish a boy that fell." Robert closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. When he spoke, it was a groan given words. "Cersei, or a Lannister of another name," Ned said. He did not say Jaime. He did not need to. Robert's mouth twisted as if he had bitten something that turned to bone. "We will hold court tomorrow," Ned said. "We will ask for an accounting for every member of the royal household. We will lay that blade on the table and see who flinches." "That's not proof." "No," Ned agreed. "But it will open a door, and I will open another." He would send a letter by Luwin's fastest raven to Dragonstone. He would write to Stannis Baratheon with the one thing Stannis respected more than command, the truth stated plainly. He would say, "Jon Arryn is dead, and a queen sleeps under my roof with her brother near her, and a boy lies with death sitting on his chest, and you vanished when a man I trust died. Tell me what you know." He did not like Stannis. Too thorny, too rigid, too certain. But he did not fear that Stannis' certainty would bow where it should not. Tyrion did what he always did when the room stank of politics. He went looking for good drink and better conversation with someone who had no use for him except to have their ears warmed by cleverness. He found Jon Snow on the parapet because Jon was always in places where the air could cut him clean. "Cold night," Tyrion said, breathing steam. "They're all cold," Jon said. "You think that now. Wait until the wall." Tyrion leaned his elbows on the stone and stared into snow and dark. "I am thinking of going there. You've made it sound almost tolerable." "I said it was honest," Jon said. "Honest is not tolerable. Does your father know you speak like a knight of old?" Tyrion said, smiling without heat. "I like you, Snow. You do not preen at courtesy or spit at it. You treat it like a coat to put on when wind cuts. You should wear more coats up there." Jon's breath made the barest laugh. "What should you do at the wall? Piss off the Lord Commander. Read books. Mock men who swing swords with a clumsy pride." He shrugged. "I would embarrass my family with charity if I gave myself the time." "You are a Lannister," Jon said, and he did not mean it as a judgment, and somehow that made it worse. "Even so," Tyrion said. He looked down at the yard and at the warm window where candles seemed to stand guard over a boy who had fallen. "Someone just tried to cut a child's throat. I am a Lannister. I am not that Lannister." He paused. "But if you meant to climb a wall forever, boy, beware who stands behind you." "I'm not a boy," Jon said, too quickly. "And that means you can be hurt in new ways." Tyrion clapped his shoulder, unexpectedly gentle. "We leave in 2 days. Come with me north. It's better than sitting under the Queen's eye while men look at you like a lesson they forgot." Jon went because he had always meant to, because the parting would be cleaner if he made himself bleed for it. Catelyn did not bless him. Ned did, and Robb tried to be brave and almost managed it. Arya clung without tears, and Nymeria snuffled at Ghost with a scorn that barely hid affection. Sansa said the right-seeming things and watched him with a hurt confusion because she could see that his going made a pattern in the world and she could not guess its meaning. He rode with Tyrion through Wintertown and past the silent shapes of trees in their winter coats and over the field where boys learned to tilt, and then through the gate and the world opened. Benjen Stark rode with them, and he and Jon spoke of long shifts and cold, and Tyrion laughed and told stories about brothels in Lannisport with all the sex politely clipped out of them as if the snow itself required it. The royal party did not leave. They held winter court. When the first cases had come and gone and all the ladies had remarked on how the king's face grew red and then white and then red, Again, like a boiled lobster expressing opinions, a letter came to Winterfell from Dragonstone. It arrived like all things from Dragonstone, sealed with sharp black wax and smelling of smoke. Ned took it in his solar with Luwin at his shoulder and opened it. The script was spare and without ornament, like a man who had no patience for quills that made frills. Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, it read. Your letter reached me. You ask what I know. I know that the Hand was killed, though the city speaks otherwise, or if not killed then driven to death by poison and curiosity. I know he examined a book, the lineages and histories of the great houses of the 7 kingdoms, of which there are 3 copies in the city, one in the King's Hand, one in the Great September, one among the Red Keep's mealy refuse. I know he called on armorers to see bastards and proof of the king's seed. I know that Joffrey, the queen's son, bears no likeness to his father. This may be nothing. It may be that the gods played a trick and gave the boy his mother's hair. It may be treason. In either case, I am not there to insist on truth because I will not die like Jon did, strangled with silk words. I am on Dragonstone and I will not leave unless the king summons me, which he will not while the harlot queen grips him by the belly and the neck both. If you would have proof, call for the book. Call for others. Look to the queen's brother. If you are the man Jon said you were, you will do what he could not finish and likely die for it. Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone. Luwin exhaled. 7 save us. The old gods, Ned said. He folded the letter with care, as if paper could be honored by neatness. He would not show this to Catelyn yet. He would show it to Robert, though he would have given his hand to find another way. He brought the letter to the king in the morning when the court had assembled and the hall had a hum in it like bees had moved into the rafters. Robert read, and the red drained from his face, and then came back in a new way. So, Robert said. His voice made a small sound in the throat, like someone had struck iron. So, Cersei sat, not at his side, but lower on the dais, and her lashes were long and dark and half-closed because she smelled a trap and would not spring it. Jaime stood near a pillar with his arms crossed, lazy as a cat on a high wall. Tyrion was not in the hall. Ser Barristan stood a pace behind the king and did not move a hair. "Bring me the book," Robert said. His voice carried to the walls. "Bring me my hand's book. Lineages." He looked at Ned. "It exists here? Every keep's library has a copy or cousin of it," Luwin said from the benches, standing unbidden. "It's a common work. I will fetch ours." Cersei lifted her chin. "You will indulge my curiosity, husband. What do you mean to prove with a list of names?" "I mean to prove whether my son is my son," Robert said, loud enough that the rumor ran ahead of the words. The hall rippled. Someone hissed. Someone laughed. A short, ugly sound, and stopped. "Or whether I am nothing but a goat raising a wolf." Cersei smiled. It was not kind. "Ask your mirror," she said. The book came. Robert thumbed it crudely like a man turning a woman who displeased him. He stared at it and then at the queen's boy and then at Jaime. Joffrey puffed up like a little frog, confused and angry at the same time, which is how little frogs get eaten. Ned did not let this be a spectacle, though part of him wanted the spectacle, the open breaking of a crime that had broken him. He stepped forward, quiet, and said, "Your Grace, send for Ser Barristan to bring you the names of your bastards in the city. You will not have their faces here, but you know how they looked. Look around you." He turned and let his eyes pass over 100 northern faces, coal-black hair and ashen brown, a handful flax. A king's seed tells its tale. The Targaryens married brothers to sisters to keep their hair and their madness. Baratheons breed true. The seed is strong. Joffrey is golden. "Golden like the Lannisters," someone muttered, which was not helpful and very satisfying. Cersei's smile grew wider and thinner both. "Do you think the realm will endure this interrogation of my womb? You cannot ask a queen to lift her skirts at your whim, Eddard Stark." "I ask a king to bring justice to his realm," Ned said, and he spoke without heat. "If your children are his, no voice in the world can say otherwise once the truth is laid. If," Cersei said, like a coin being put on a table, "You are very brave, Lord Stark." The thing in Robert's face where laughter lived had fled. "Answer him," Robert said, hoarse. He set the book down. His hands shook. "Answer him." Cersei's gaze moved to Jaime and back. There was the smallest flicker of a nod, less than a breath. "No," she said. The hall pulled in. You could feel the world lean. "No," she said again, and smiled like a man who has decided to take an arrow in the chest and spit the fletching out. "Would you like a story, my king? Once there was a stag who married a lion in a tent drenched in blood and victory. The lion was proud and bore her claws beneath her silk. The stag was drunk on the hunt and forgot he had antlers. Later, when the stag came home, he found his bed too cold for love and too hot for shame. And the lion burned her paws on that bed and went to lie with another lion who did not squeal like a pig at the least slight. And the stag had children with the lion. They were pretty. It wasn't a confession. It was a weapon. It hit Robert's jaw and bounced and hit again. Everything happened at once. Joffrey barked something without sense. The hound moved a half step with that odd protective instinct he had for the boy even when he hated him. Jaime straightened with a sudden bright interest. Ser Barristan came one pace forward and then still. "Ned did not draw the sword at his back because you do not draw a sword at a king unless you mean to divide the realm, and he did not." He looked at Robert. Robert was very still. He looked at his hands again, and then up. He did not look at Cersei. He looked at the space above her head as if she were already gone. "Guards," he said. His voice was a thing from a long time ago, battle hoarse, deeper than feasts. "Take the queen to her chambers. Take the boy and the girl. No, leave the little one. Take Joffrey and Myrcella. Ser Barristan, attend me." "Jaime." "You'll address me as Ser," Jaime said lazily, and there was a point under the laziness. "Ser Jaime," Robert said through teeth, "you will surrender your sword to my hand. You will remain in Winterfell as my guest and prisoner until I have decided whether the queen lives or dies. Or you can resist, and then I will hang you from the inner gate and watch your shadow kick." The time between those words and movement after was the measure of a life. Jaime smiled with one corner of his mouth. "Always choice," he said. He turned his sword and laid it at last upon his palms and said, "Of course." Then, before any man could think that meant peace, he took 2 quick steps and thrust the blade up at the hand of a guard who was half a heartbeat too slow. The man cried out and dropped his spear. Jaime moved like the word for it had just been invented and he'd been given it first. The spear skidded across the floor, struck the dais. The hound laughed unpleasantly and put a hand on Joffrey's shoulder hard enough to make the boy wince, and pushed him back. Cersei did not scream. She had never been one to scream when she could bleed someone else with silence. Ned did not tell himself stories about heroism. He shouted the orders he had to shout. "Jory," he snapped. "The inner guards. 10 with me now." The hall became a storm. Men ran. Some men froze and then ran. Barristan had his sword out with that same terrible economy he did everything in, and he took a step and let it be the difference between men living and dying without thinking about which it would be. Jaime danced back to his sister and put himself between the stairs and every man with a blade. Robert did not move. He sat in his chair and watched a version of his own life be killed and thrown into a pit. Then he stood. "Enough," he said, and the word had weight. "Jaime, if you cut one man in this hall, you'll be trussed at a flaying post before you take breath." "Roose Bolton will be delighted," Tyrion drawled from the doors. He had come to see the end of a play and found the beginning of a war. "But I thought we were civilized, brother." "Stand aside," Ned told him, and Tyrion shrugged and moved, not without grace, to a bench where he could see and not be in the way. He gave the small wave of a man excusing himself from a murder. Jaime glanced toward the side door, the small one that led to an inner stair. "Cersei," he said without looking back. "Go." The queen did not go. She stood because she knew a retreat in front of a hall is sometimes a truer death than steel. But when Jory and his men closed from one side and the Stark guards from the other and Ser Barristan came forward like a piece of winter with a sword in its hand, she put one hand on Joffrey's shoulder and let the hound shepherd the boy toward the side door with sudden vicious speed. Myrcella tripped and a guard caught her. She cried out, a thin, pretty sound that made 3 men flinch and 2 curse. Jaime cut the spear from a man's hands as if it were ribbon and threw the shaft. Clattered like judgment and was not. He moved again, and this time Barristan was there to meet him, white cloak swaying just enough to make a scribe weep for the line of it. Sire, Barristan said. There was no heat, only reproach. Sire, Jaime mocked, but there was a chagrin under it, as if he did not enjoy the improvisation now that honor stood in his way rather than an enemy's gullet. He parried. They touched and sprang apart. Jaime flicked the edge of his blade against the white silk and nicked it. Barristan's mouth tightened by a hair. You could hear men breathe. Then Robert's bellow came again. Stand! In the king's name, stand. Men do odd things when a king shouts that at them. They remember battles. They remember hangings. They look at the man who used to be young beside the boy they love or hate and measure which rope they choose. Jaime took a slow step back and let his sword lower. He laughed, without mirth. Very well. I am your guest, he said. He held his blade by the tip to Jory and nodded to Ned. I surrender my sword to your hand. Pretty title for a cold room. Jory took the sword so carefully it could have been a baby handed over a river. Around them, men exhaled. The hound was gone with Joffrey. The side door hung ajar like a mouth just stopped screaming. Myrcella had gone with a Stark woman who moved with Septa Mordane's prim care. Tommen was crying down by the pillars and a guard had him, bulky arms making a sudden gentleness around his worry. Cersei stood with her head high and her hands clasped with such violence you could see the whiteness of it. Robert stood with all color drained and belly taut, for once more iron than fat. Take the queen to her chambers, he repeated. Confine her there. Take Myrcella there also. Postmen. The prince is to be found and brought to me. He did not say bring him gently, and the room filled the omission with its own thoughts. Jaime smiled again as if he had been moved by an actor with a stick. Barristan lowered his blade an inch. And if anyone touches her without my word, Robert said low, I will hang him myself. Cersei let them take her without gesture or word. She had learned long ago that quiet can wound more than screams. She passed Ned and looked at him long, and he had the sense of looking into a mirror turned to a stranger. 2 people doing what they thought truth demanded, with a world between. When she was gone, the hall felt curiously empty. D of color. Later, in the council chamber that had never hoped to host a small council and now endured something like it, they drank winter wine because the northern stores had more of that this far from the sea. Robert sat with the book sitting like a girl he had jilted. What have we done? He asked finally, and there was no bluster in it. What had to be done? Ned said. You have been lied to, your fatherhood mocked, your line threatened. Jon Arryn died pressing quills into paper, looking for this truth. He did not have the North around him to make his spine stronger. You do. I have the North, Robert said. And I have Tywin Lannister to the west and a lioness in my chamber whose bite has not yet been measured. He rubbed at his eyes. 7 save us. What will Tywin do? What he always does, Tyrion said. He had been invited because he had not left, and because there was a little sanity in putting a Lannister in the room when you spoke of Lannisters. He poured the last of the wine and did not pretend to sip. He will count. He will measure insult against profit. He will not rush to war for honor. He would not for love. He will for advantage. If you keep his daughter and his granddaughter and his heir in soft captivity, he will sharpen his quill. If you harm them, he will sharpen other things. You should keep them, and you should send him a letter full of honey and threat both. And then you should send men to make certain he cannot march north this winter, even if he is mad enough to try. He is not mad enough to try. Wise counsel, Ned said, because it was. He did not like the taste of it, but he was old enough to know that his likes made no difference to a world that had never bent for him. We have the neck. Moat Catelyn will close if we ask it. The phrase can be bought with words first, if not with coin, and Lord Hoster will send men if asked. We can hold the passes until spring. Speak for your own rivers, Stark, Tyrion said easily, but this time the ease was a mask. My father can find a way if he wants a way. We built roads before you were born. Still, winter is on your side." He looked down at his cup as if there might be answers in the dregs. "If I were you, I would send for Lord Stannis. He is a prickly bastard, but he is straight. If you make him listen to a king who tells him yes instead of a queen who tells him no, he'll come to fight for law. He likes law. He would marry it if he could." Robert made a face. "And I'll have both my brothers at my board telling me what I should do like squires who can't keep their own feet." "Better a brother you can hear than a father you cannot," Tyrion said, and Robert waved him away with a grunt that was not unfriendly. "In the meantime, send your ravens. Call men from the Vale and the Riverlands. The country will understand a winter court turned war council. They like names." Ned thought of Catelyn then. He had hidden the worst of it from her because she was made of steel and he did not want to bend her to breaking. She had already gone to Lisa with Ser Roderick riding at her side and wind cutting their faces raw on the road to White Harbor. He had watched her go from the battlements as a boy watches his kite leave his hand. He remembered Rickon waving once and then forgetting to wave because a dog had chewed a stick into a shape he liked. He remembered Robb standing too straight and then slumping after his mother could no longer see. He remembered Arya throwing a clod of snow at the wall and missing and then grinning at the miss like it was a victory. He remembered Sansa's mouth, a thin line that would have been pretty if it had not tried so hard not to shake. Catelyn was on the sea now with a stomach for it she had never owned. If the gods were kind, she would be in Gulltown in a week and up the mountain to Lisa's airy madness soon after. If the gods were not kind, they were only being themselves. In her ship's belly, Catelyn learned that fear of the sea is a ladder like any other. You climb until your hands go numb and then you are at the top and you don't fall because there is nowhere to fall to accept more sea. She slept in a nest of wool and rope and woke to gulls and the bite of salt. She had no time to be sick. When they reached Gulltown and Roderick had his land legs again with an offended dignity, they went up like beads on a string. Up through the Vale where snow had a different taste and the light seemed to come from a higher place, up to the bloody gate and a passage held by men with beards like spears, men who looked at her and saw Hoster Tully's girl and raised the bar without question. She went into the Eyrie with its cold glass and found Lisa thin and too bright. "I told you," Lisa said, hands fluttering at the edges of her dress as if it were a bird she had not quite learned how to keep. "I told you not to trust the Lannisters." Catelyn took her hands and pressed them tight enough to steady them. "Tell me everything again." While she did in the Eyrie, men at the crossroads told stories in a smoky room to pass a night that was too cold for dice. One story became a hand at a sword hilt, and that became Tyrion Lannister coming in the door with wet hair and a grin that had ice in his beard, and Catelyn stood up and named him before the room and called her father's bannermen to seize him. "In the name of Lord Hoster Tully, I call upon you to seize this man and aid me in bringing him to my sister for judgment," she said, and the men looked from her to the dwarf and back, and thought of oaths and coin and what stories they wanted to tell their sons in warmth 20 years from now, and the room curled itself around a choice. Tyrion did not fight. He lifted both hands and bowed because sometimes the only dignity is in how you go when there are too many swords and not enough doors. "Lady Stark," he said pleasantly, "I've been arrested in worse company." Ser Roderick was not there to keep the peace. He had gone with Catelyn. And the men who seized Tyrion were braver than they were wise. The high road to the Eyrie bit at them with teeth of ice and stone. Mountain clans came like shadows with knives. By the time they pushed through to the bloody gate, 2 were dead and 1 bled from the arm stubbornly and another had his courage hanging in strips. Tyrion watched it all with that unpleasant amusement of a scholar who has discovered he is the subject of an experiment. "And I did not even try to kill a child," he muttered once, when a man's boots skidded and he clutched at a rock. "Shut your mouth," said a Vale man, and they climbed on. In Winterfell, the days fell into a pattern that was no pattern at all. Robert drank and hunted and almost laughed again sometimes. He summoned messengers and wrote letters with his blunt hand. He had a stag killed and roasted, and the smell of it made men feel like the oldest times had come at last with their salt and their blood. The hall filled and emptied and filled again. Men went and came and left rumors in corners. Cersei paced in a long room with windows iced to opal and asked for paper and pen and wrote, and the letters sat on a table because the king said they would not leave Winterfell, and they did not. Joffrey sulked and learnt to hate stones that did not soften at his voice. He threw a cup at a serving boy and the hound cuffed him, and then stood and let the boy spit in his direction and said, "Would you like to try your hand?" to Joffrey, and the boy ran. Myrcella learned to sew with Sansa and Septa Mordain and took to it better than Sansa did. For Myrcella had a happiness Sansa lacked just then. Tommen made friends of the direwolves in a way that made his mother grind her teeth if she had known of it. He laughed as if the sound could fill the holes that adults had begun to make in his world. They still had to be fools, all of them. Time demands it. On the 5th day after Cersei's confinement, Arya and Joffrey met trouble in a place that was neither training yard nor hall. Arya found a sword because she always would. It was a bit too long and a bit too heavy, and that only made her grin. It had belonged to no one and everyone. It had a nick near the hilt that was like a small story. She swung it, clumsy and honest, in a quiet stretch of the inner yard where snow made everything cool and clean. Theon watched from a wall and shouted advice with a smile that was more mischief than cruelty. A butcher's boy whose father worked in the kitchens, the child answered to Micah, stood with all written all over him and held out his hand to feel the weight of it. Arya let him because kindness came naturally to her until someone told her it shouldn't, and then she did it anyway. Joffrey found them. He found things to be offended by as other boys found pennies. He wore gloves too fine for Winterfell and a sneer like a scar. "What's this?" he said, pitching his voice high with disdain. "Playing at war, little sister?" "We're practicing," Arya said. "I have a sword. You have a stick." Joffrey saw Micah's hand on the hilt and his eyes lit. "And a little peasant has a lord's steel." "Thief." Micah flinched as all small boys flinch when a meaner one comes. "It's not stolen, my prince," he stammered. Lady Arya said. Joffrey drew the pretty ornamental blade he wore, and it looked sharp enough to cut the air. Lady Arya. He sneered the title into something else. "Give the sword to me." "No," Arya said, very clear. It felt good to say it, as if she had found a truth in her own chest. "Dog," Joffrey called, and the hound was there because Joffrey could conjure him with that insult like a demon, and because Sandor Clegane stayed close to the only thing in the world he could bear to call a duty without wanting to kill it. "Hold these two while I teach them about the difference between a stick and a blade." Sandor glanced at Arya and at the butcher's boy and at the bit of the hound that remembered a boy pushed into a fire and held there by a big brother. "Perhaps you should fetch your mother first," he said, neutral as an anvil. Joffrey's mouth twisted. He took a step, and in the same moment Nymeria flowed from the stair like water taught to bite. She went for Joffrey's wrist because Arya had taught her to play, and drawing blood is play for wolves. Joffrey screamed. The hound moved and caught the wolf by the midsection and threw her. Nymeria landed skidding and came up spitting, ready to take on arms and men and cold alike. Arya did not think. She took the sword from Micah and stepped between. "Stop it!" she shouted. "Stop it, Joff, or I'll—" "You'll what?" Joffrey hissed, and he swung. The blade grazed her and stung, and Arya swung back clumsily, and the hound stepped in again and batted the sword out of her hands. It clanged across stone and skittered to Theon's boot. He reached to pick it up, idly, like a man retrieving a toy, and the hound looked at him with flat eyes and he let it lie. Men poured into the yard with a speed that says a hall had been waiting for a fight. Septa Mordain cried prayers and Sansa came running white-faced and Lady at her heels, quieter than Nymeria, calmer, watching with golden eyes that missed nothing. When it was done and the prince's wrist wrapped and the butcher's boy shot away like a startled colt and Septa Mordain slapped Arya's hands and told her she was an unnatural creature, the king came and asked what had happened because he had decided to require truth 3 times a day like bread. He found 2 versions of truth, and the queen shaped his hearing of them. In the end, Robert said, "Enough, enough of children and their fool's quarrels." He looked at the hound and his voice dropped and grew abrupt. "The wolf will be confined, both of them. I will not have wolves in the yard when my son cannot master his own temper." He glanced at Luwin. "It's not so long to thaw. When we leave, they go south in cages." Ned said, "No," and Robert turned in disbelief because no was a thing he had not heard since he had learned to ride. "I will not cage my children's guardians." "It's a wolf," Cersei said, "not a guardian. And look." She lifted Joffrey's hand and showed the small bite mark that was already swelling under the bandage, as if it wanted to tell a greater story. "You drew first," Arya said, and Sansa said, "Arya, quiet," and looked at the ground. She could not make herself look at the queen. That night she lay in her bed and listened to Lady breathe beside her and felt a dread like illness that had nothing to do with sickness. Ned went to Robert's chamber and they spoke the way men do when they have known each other long enough to say yes and no without courtesy. The compromise was ugly as compromises are when lives are part of them. The queen wanted blood. Robert, who was tired of blood when it did not carry an enemy with it, chose to soothe her with a death that would leave him awake at night. "The wolf must die," he said. "Then do it yourself," Ned said. "You make the order, you swing the blade." "I have a king's justice," Robert said, but he looked away. "So do I." Ned stood and left and went and found Sansa in the hall like a small ship without wind, and took her hand, and told her to go to her mother while he went to the yard. He found Lady there, quiet, patient, dignified as always, and something in his chest tried to claw out. He took ice into his hands. Felt heavy and honest, as it always did. The wolf did not run. He spoke to her softly, an apology from a man who had too much to apologize for. He made a clean cut and the blood ran black on snow. After, he stood a long time with his hands numb and the sword heavy and the world suddenly very sharp. And he thought, "I will remember this the next time I must tell my children something about justice." The next morning, ravens left Winterfell in pairs to Dragonstone, inviting Stannis to Winterfell under safe conduct, to Riverrun, asking Hoster Tully for men and Wiseman's counsel, to the Eyrie, ordering Lisa to bring herself to court and answer for her letter or answer another kind of question, softer but more perilous, to the Riverlands lords, warning of wolves to the west that had learned to walk on two legs and hide their claws in velvet, to White Harbor, bidding Manderley keep watch for Lannister ships that might fancy bringing iron to ice, to King's Landing none. The city could discover truths from winter birds and gossip as it always had. Stannis did not come with speed. Beings like Stannis traveled at the pace law permitted, and winter slows laws as much as men. He sent letters. He would come, he said. He named his conditions, which were somehow also duties. He named who must be present and who must not. Ned read it and felt weariness and relief together, like a long-held breath finally admitted out. Tywin Lannister did not write. When he moved, the many eyes watching for this twitch said that men began to vanish in the hills near the Golden Tooth, and that the forges of Lannisport rang by night with a vigor the winter had not otherwise invited. A party of Lannister men rode from the west to the Riverlands to ask small questions with sharp knives. A village burned somewhere on the road between Stony September and Pink Maiden. The river lords bristled. The phrase sent back a letter so ambiguous that you could read in it your worst fears and your best hopes, and neither would be wrong. In Winterfell, Bran opened his eyes. It was the 7th morning after the knife fought Catelyn. The room was quiet. Men had gone because silence seemed kinder when you thought you would have to make it permanent. Catelyn had fallen asleep with her head on the bed and her hand near Bran's and the ache of her wounded palm humming like a song beneath her dreams. Robb had crouched on the floor and fallen into the heavy, uneven breathing of boys who have defeated their own youth by staying awake longer than anyone had thought possible. Summer lay with his muzzle on Bran's foot as if a string bound them. Bran opened his eyes. They were his mother's color, which she had always loved and which she would now hate because they made him look like the thing that had almost gone away and left her. He said nothing at first. He blinked and looked up at the bedclothes like a map written on cloud. Then he made a small noise, like someone greeting a dog, and Summer made a deep sound in his throat and wagged his tail once without moving anything else. Catelyn woke with a bleat she would have been ashamed of if she had had time. She sat up and reached for him. "Bran," she said, and the word broke. He looked at her and smiled, slow, like a boy being kind to his mother. "Bran." She put her hand on his cheek and then the bandaged one on his chest and then both hands everywhere, greedy, terrified she would find emptiness. Can you? He blinked. He tried to sit and grimaced. He looked to his legs as if they were someone else's. I dreamt, he said, of falling, of a crow. He frowned. It had 3 eyes. Catelyn pressed a kiss to his brow. You came back. That's what matters. He moved his hand, a small stiff thing. His fingers went to his temple. There were voices, he said slowly, like someone who has heard a tale in High Valyrian and now tried to recall if he had understood. A man, a woman. His brow wrinkled. Golden. Catelyn's breath stopped. She did not ask. She did not lead. Where? In the broken tower, he said, and shut his eyes because the sudden effort of saying had opened the door to pain. I climbed. I always do. His mouth twisted. My legs. We'll find a way, she said. We will. Hush. The rest can wait. Could not. But for an hour they let it. Ned went into the yard and looked at the towers with new eyes. He could see the path a boy would take. He had been a boy here once and taken it himself. He wondered if Jaime had the sense to keep his face composed. And news of Bran's waking reached the keep. He wondered if Cersei would pray to gods she had never thought worth more than their trappings. He did not know whether to be glad the boy remembered or wish he did not. He had wanted proof. Proof can be a knife as much as a blanket. He went to Robert with the news. Robert grunted, and for a moment joy creased his face into something like youth. Good, he said. Good. There is a bit of mercy, then. Then the joy faded and the duties and griefs and thoughts of Tywin took its place. What did he see? Ned did not lie. He remembers voices. He remembers gold. He remembers the broken tower. Robert's eyes closed. What a mess, he said wonderingly. What a God's damned mess. He stood. Come. We'll see him. I'll bring Barristan. I'll leave the queen where she is. Better so, Ned said. They went to Bran's chamber and the boy smiled for the king and called him Your Grace dutifully and politely, because even a boy newly awakened from falling understands something about thrones. Robert sat on the edge of the bed and asked if he wanted a horse when he was up. Bran, who had not yet begun to understand what it meant to be down forever from the waist, said yes and then looked away. Robert's face twisted, and he ruffled the boy's hair and stood. You owe me a race, he said, and rose and left because he could not remain in a room where summer had been cut and someone had hummed a pleasant lie into the air. Stannis Baratheon came, for weeks after the first letter, a dark gull of a man with a salt-stiff beard and a mouth carved for scorn. He brought Davos Seaworth, who sat like a man trying to learn a new alphabet in a holy place and not showing how grateful he was. Stannis took the measure of Winterfell and its men the way a carpenter taps a beam to see if it will hold. He bowed to Robert because law demanded it and nothing else would have done it, and he grimaced at Cersei's confinement with something like satisfaction and something like disgust. You invited me, he said to Robert, and I came. His voice could cut leather. Will you do as law commands? Law commands me to kill my queen? Robert asked because he had begun to drink less and ask more questions that sounded like this. He and Stannis looked at each other like two men who had had their mother stolen by different wolves. Law commands you to make a realm out of something more than lies, Stannis said, and to name an heir who has your blood. Renly will want it. I will not accept him while I draw breath. Joffrey is not yours. The girl is not yours. The little one. He lifted a hand and let it fall. We will not speak of him. I do not make war on babes. In any case, succession would pass by him with the taint upon it. The line comes to me. Robert's mouth hardened. You always wanted what I had, he said. I wanted what law said you must give, Stannis retorted, and that was the same as always. He glanced at Ned and some small thing changed in his face. Not pleasure, not exactly respect. Perhaps the small relaxation of a man who finds one straight board in a pile of warped timber. Eddard Stark, he said, you wrote me. You've done what had to be done so far. Will you do the rest? I will keep the king's peace, Ned said. By letting a woman who has cuckolded a king all his life live to make letters? Stannis shook his head. "Do not be mealy. Justice does not always bleed," Ned said. He thought of Lady on the Snow. He thought of the boy who had fell, who would never run. He thought of a realm that had learned to live with ugliness so long that it could not believe in plain beauty anymore and distrusted virtue like a traveling show. "Cutting throats of queen and child is not justice," Robert said, surprising them both. "I'll not be a kinslayer and a coward together. Cersei will be put aside. There's law for that too. She will go to Casterly Rock and brood there and write letters to my enemies and my friends with the same ink. Joffrey will be named bastard and sent to the wall, or if he will not go, he can take ship for Lys with a purse and learn what bastards do there. Myrcella." He stopped and looked heavy. "I'll make a match for her that suits her station. Tommen can be a page in the north. He's a sweet boy." He lifted his head and tried to be a king. "I'll name you heir, Stannis. There. The crown's yours when I'm dust, if you don't choke on a plum first." Stannis bowed, a movement like a hinge that has seen hard work. "As law commands," he said. His eyes rested on Ned in a way that said, "There, we have spoken truth. Now we live with it." Living with it took the shape of men on horses, of women with baskets, of dogs under tables. It took the shape of Jaime under quiet guard in a tower where a window faced west, and the sun made his hair look like the thing it always had been and turned out to be nothing like it. He sat and learned to be still, which he hated more than hunger, and he played Syvass with himself and won and lost with equal contempt. Sometimes he thought of the boy and had the cold sweat. Sometimes he did not. The hound kept Joffrey close and taught him where to put his feet when he drew. The boy learned only a little. His hands were soft and his head was full of noise that did not leave room for instruction. Sansa learned to sew with Myrcella and Septa Mordain and thought of songs. She did not forget Lady. She learned to keep that grief like a wet stone in her pocket, warmed by her hand. One day she brought Myrcella to the Godswood, just to walk and see the tree, and Myrcella pressed her hand to the bark because she did not know that you shouldn't if you did not belong, and the gods did not mind, because they were too old to care about such specifics. They sat together on a bench with melting snow running under it into a little stream. "Will you go back to the city?" Sansa asked. "I don't know," Myrcella said. She looked as if the question made her sad and see. "Urius both. It's cold here, but it's quiet. The city is never quiet. I liked the summer cloaks they made me there, but I like this too. I like the way people are not laughing when they smile." She touched Sansa's hand without a queen looking. "I hope my mother does not die," she said, and Sansa squeezed back because she knew how a daughter is made of love regardless of what a mother is. Robb took on the shape of a lord. It did not fit at first, like a cloak with the hem dragging. He learned to sit a horse the way a man does when he is not going to lift his head and ride away alone but take 100 with him. He learned to listen to the Great John and not be bullied by him. He learned that Roose Bolton had eyes like winter shade. He learned to smile at Manderly's letters and understand that half of what the Fat Lord wrote was plainer than most men's truths. Jon reached the wall. He saw it like a white mountain that men had made and trembled and wanted it and did not, and then wanted it again because a boy who has been told something will test it even if it will hurt. He sent one letter to Robb and one to Arya and none to Sansa because he did not know how to write to her without making something worse. He wrote one to his father that was shorter than it should have been and longer than he wanted. He learned the names of boys who would be his brothers if they survived. Gren and PYP, and a very angry boy named Thorin Smallwood who would never be his friend. He met Samwell Tarly and made an ally. He met the Lord Commander and made a goal. He met Maester Aemon and did not yet know what he had met. Tyrion made the Lord Commander laugh and then irritated him and then left the wall in good graces because he had a knack. On his way back south under escort, Tyrion Lannister met a woman with eyes the color of old coins and a mouth like cunning. She stole his purse. He stole her time. By the time he reached the crossroads again, he had stories to tell and no one to pay. He bought his supper with jokes and a trick with the cup. When Catelyn Stark stood, the room went quiet and time did something it always does when old names are hung on new scenes. It slowed. "In the name of Lord Hoster Tully," she said, "I ask my father's men to aid me. Tyrion lifted his hands and bowed because he did not see a way to make the tavern into a better stage. He wondered if the gods were laughing or only bored, and if there was a difference. War danced at the edge of sight like a wolf in the trees that you are not yet sure is there. The riverlands began to burn in small places. The crown's men in the city grew nervous and greedy. Renly arrived in Winterfell with a smile and cloaks that made Northmen snort, and found Stannis there, and the two brothers looked at each other and saw boys in different armor. They spoke. They quarreled. They agreed in writing and not at all in the heart. Robert drank with them and tried to pretend he liked it. The North learned to flex. Moat Catelyn's ruins became haunted by men and pikes and the thought of spears. The neck shrank and swelled with the marsh, and Howland Reed's children swam in it like fish, watching with green eyes and laughter they kept to themselves. On a night when wind beat the walls in a way that said the world is older than you and always will be, Ned went down to the crypt. He took no lantern. He knew the steps, and Winterfell knew him. He stood in the dark where the old king sat and measured the cold with his hand in the air. He spoke to no one. He felt the weight of what he had done like armor and liked the shape of it even as it bit his shoulders. He thought of a boy on a tower and two heads turned together and a hand that pushed. He thought of a wolf that had laid down her life because a king had to be soothed. He thought of a king who had chosen a law over a death and wondered if that would save them or only lengthen the story. Above him, snow fell lightly, almost a blessing. Bran slept. In his sleep, a crow stepped across his pillow and looked at him with a third eye that was a hole into something that was either deeper truth or only old madness. Bran turned his head and dreamed of roots under ice and a wolf running through trees and a gate of black stone so tall the stars vanished. He dreamed of a face with tears frozen on it. He did not wake. He slept and the world took one breath and then another. Catelyn climbed the mountain steps to the Eyrie with Tyrion's chains clinking behind her and thought, I may have done a terrible thing in the right place. Lisa met her with Lord Aaron's boy in her arms and a hatred that had learned to sing. Tyrion spoke his name and smiled like an instrument. The moon door listened. Jaime Lannister looked out his tower window at a white world and thought about oaths and how the men who write them never think of a cold room with old stones and the stink of a body kept too clean. He smirked and did not. The Hound sat in Joffrey's room and whittled a bit of wood into a thing that might have been a horse and might have been a stake and thought of fire and did not put it into his story. Sansa dreamt of songs in which queens were good and kings noble and thought, perhaps, the trick is to choose which song is true and sing it until the world believes you. Arya learned to move her feet when she was not seen and kept her hands nimble. And Nymeria learned the paths around Winterfell that wolves had walked when there were kings without iron. Robert Baratheon lay in a bed with furs heavy as the dead and stared at a ceiling where some eager ancestor had had men paint a battle, and saw none of it. He saw a girl on a bier with blue roses in her hair. He saw a boar. He saw a throne with knives for legs. He saw a cup with wine dark as blood and thought how easy it is to soften men with sweetness until they forget they have teeth. He rolled and snored and woke and looked for someone to laugh with and found no one. He rose and went to the Yar. And found Ned standing under falling snow and said what he always did when the world became too much. Ned, Robert, we did what we could, Robert said. Winter is coming, Ned said, and Robert swore and laughed and cried and then stopped and shook his head. Let it come, he said. We'll sit in your God's yard and spit it in the eye together. That, Ned said, finally smiling, is a thing we can do. They stood together while flakes settled in their hair, and the keep breathed around them, and men moved like pawns and kings and queens on squares too cold for anyone sane. For now, the court remained in the north and the world took their measure. It would change. It always did. But for a time longer than anyone had meant, the seat at the center of winter had a king in it, and the old gods watched with eyes the color of blood and snow, and somewhere far beyond every map, something very old took a breath and remembered how to move.